Section 2 objective is to describe ways first responders use the Emergency Response Guidebook at hazard materials incidents. Emergency Response Guidebook, otherwise known as the ERG, is a guide to aid emergency responders in quickly identifying initial hazmat hazards involved in a transportation emergency incident. This allows you to help protect yourself and others during the incident's initial response phase by avoiding and minimizing hazards. The ERG is primarily designed to be used at hazmat incidents occurring on a highway or railroad. Isolation and protective distances in the ERG are based on conditions commonly associated with transportation incidents in open areas and may not be useful when applied to fixed facility locations or in urban settings. Note, just remember that the ERG does not address all possible circumstances that may be associated with a dangerous goods or hazardous materials incident. You can locate the appropriate initial action guide page in the ERG in several different ways. One is by identifying the 4-digit UN identification number on a placard or the shipping papers, then looking up the appropriate guide in the yellow bordered pages. The second is to reference the name of the material involved if known in the blue bordered pages. Many chemical names differ only by a few letters, so the exact spelling is important when using this method. The third is to identify the material's transportation placard and then reference the 3-digit code associated with the placard in the table of placards and initial response guide to use on scene located in the front of the ERG. The last, you can reference the container profiles provided in the white pages in the front of the book. First responders can identify container shapes and then cross-reference the guide number in the orange bordered page provided in nearest circle. By using the 4-digit ID number or the chemical name, it will allow the responders to locate the most specific initial action guide to be used. The white pages provide instructions for using the ERG. There are 2 white page sections, one in the front and one in the back. The front section provides information on the following: shipping documents, then how to use this guidebook, then it has a place for you to put local emergency telephone numbers. Then the next page is the table of contents, followed by safety precautions, then the notification and request for technical information. 2. Then the next page is the table of contents, followed by safety precautions, then the notification and request for technical information. The hazard classification system is next. Then you have the introduction to the table of markings, labels, and placards. Then the next 2 pages, you will see the table of markings, labels, and placards, an initial response guide to use on scene. Then you have the rail car identification chart on the next 2 pages. Then the next 2 pages, you will see the road trailer identification chart. After that, you have 2 pages, which is in reference to the Global Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, also known as GHS. Then you have a section on the hazard identification numbers displayed on some intermodal containers, and finally you have a section on pipeline transportation. The back section provides information about the ERG 2016 User's Guide, then 2 pages on protective clothing, then there are 3 pages on fire and spill control. After that you have a page on levee, safety precautions, and then a table to use for references. Then you have a section on criminal and terrorist use of chemical, biological, and radiological agents, and several tables to use for improvised explosive devices, safe standoff distances. The glossary is next, and then publication data. Then you have Canada and the United States National Response Center pages. Then you have a place for notes, and last you have emergency response telephone numbers. Just remember, Chemtrec is not a governmental agency. The ERG's yellow bordered pages provide a 4-digit UNNA ID number index listed in numerical order. The 4-digit ID number is followed by its assigned 3-digit emergency response guide number, which will be referred to here as the guide, which are the orange bordered pages, and then the material's name. The yellow bordered section in the ERG enables first responders to identify guide number to consult for substance involved. The yellow bordered section in the ERG enables first responders to identify guide number to consult for substance involved. Green highlighting in the yellow bordered index indicates that the substance releases gas that are a toxic inhalation hazard, or TIH. These materials require enhanced emergency response distances. A P following the guide number indicates that the material polymerizes. Polymerization is a violent reaction that releases great amounts of heat and energy. The blue bordered pages of the ERG provides an index of dangerous goods in alphabetical order by material name so that the first responders can quickly identify the guide to consult for the name of the material involved. The list displays the material's name followed by its assigned 3-digit emergency response guide and then the 4-digit UNNA ID number. The user needs to be very careful when looking up a product by name, because subtle mistake in spelling can lead a responder toward a substantial misunderstanding of the product's behavior. As the yellow bordered pages, green highlighting on substances listed in the blue bordered pages indicates the release of TIH gases, and a P following the guide number indicates that the material polymerizes. Note, many agencies use a phonetic alphabet to spell chemical names. The ERG Initial Action Guides, which are the orange bordered pages, is the most useful section because it provides safety recommendations and general hazard information. The orange bordered pages comprised of individual guides presented in a 2-page format featuring 3 sections. The left-hand page lists potential hazards and public safety information. The right-hand page provides emergency response information. Each guide is designed to cover a group of materials that possesses similar chemical and toxicology characteristics. The guide title identifies the general hazards of the materials or dangerous goods addressed. The potential hazard section addresses 2 hazard types under separate headers. One is the health hazard and the second is the fire or explosion hazards. The highest potential hazard is listed first. This section should be consulted first because it will assist in making decisions regarding the protection of individuals at the incident. Types of warnings found in the section include toxic, highly flammable, and corrosive. The public safety section provides general information regarding immediate isolation of the incident site and protective clothing and respiratory protection recommendations. This section also lists suggested evacuation distances for small and large spills and for fire situations, such as distances for fragmentation hazards or for tanks that might explode. The isolation distances are provided in the bullet points immediately below public safety section headings. The initial isolation distance is a distance within which all persons should be considered for evacuation in all directions from the hazmat spill or leak source. This section can be used to identify and establish an initial isolation zone. If safe to do so, you should evacuate people from the initial isolation zone to outside the safe distance at a minimum. You should then secure the scene and deny entry or access to the isolation zone from anyone on the outside. The protective clothing section describes the type of personnel, protective clothing, and equipment that should be worn at incidents involving these products. Examples include the following: street clothing and work uniforms, structural firefighter protective clothing, also called bunker gear or turnouts, along with positive pressure self-contained breathing apparatus, also known as SCBA, and chemical protective clothing, otherwise known as CPC. The evacuation section provides evacuation recommendations for spills and fires. When the materials is highlighted in green in the yellow bordered and blue bordered pages, this section also directs the reader to consult the tables on the green bordered pages listing TIH materials and water reactive materials. Awareness level personnel will probably not be involved in evacuation beyond the initial isolation phase. On the right side is the third section of the guide, which is the emergency response section. It describes emergency response topics, including precautions for incidents involving fires, spills, or leaks, and what type of first aid to remedy. Several recommendations are listed under each section to further assist in decision-making process. The first aid information provides general guidance before seeking medical care. The awareness level responders need to be aware of information in this section, but may not be qualified to mitigate the incident. The fire section recommends the extinguishing agent that should be used on large fires, small fires, fires involving bulk containers. If foam is recommended, it will specify the type of foam to be used. Recommendations will vary by guide, but may include such things as cooling containers with flooding quantities of water or using unmanned hose holders. The spill or leak section provides actions to take in regards to spills and leaks. If a flammable liquid is involved, for example, it would recommend eliminating all ignition sources. It will also provide basic information needed to mitigate a spill, such as what materials to use to absorb the spill. As a precaution, before attempting to conduct ERG recommended operations, you must be properly trained and have the correct equipment. The first aid section provides basic steps to help victims affected by hazardous materials involved. Common recommendations includes calling for emergency medical services assistance, moving victims to fresh air, flushing contaminated skin and eyes with running water, which is known as decontamination. Avoiding direct contact with the hazardous material is also emphasized. Many recommendations provided in this section will be beyond the scope of the awareness level personnel due to the need for specialized training, personnel protective equipment, the dangers in cross-contamination, and the necessity of decontaminating victims before first aid is provided. For example, awareness level personnel should never enter hazardous atmospheres or potentially contaminated areas. Victims in hazmat incidents may present serious hazards to rescuers because they may be contaminated with the hazardous materials. Only first responders with appropriate training and wearing the appropriate personal protective clothing and equipment should touch or handle these victims. Awareness level personnel should not handle or touch contaminated or potentially contaminated victims in hazmat incidents, even as provide basic first aid. The ERG tables of initial isolation and protective action distances is in the green bordered pages. This section consists of 3 tables. Table 1, the initial isolation protective action distances. Table 2, water reactive materials which produce toxic gases. And Table 3 is the initial isolation protective action distances for different quantities of 6 common TIH gases. Table 1, again, is the initial isolation protective action distances. This table lists the toxic inhalation hazards material by the 4-digit UN ID number. The table provides 2 different types of recommended safe distances: the initial isolation distance and protective action distances. These materials are highlighted for easy identification in both numeric and alphabetic ERG indexes. The table provides isolation and protective action distances for both small and large spills. A small spill is approximately 55 gallons or less, or involves a single small package, small cylinder, or small leak from a large package. A large spill is more than 55 gallons and is one that involves a spill from a large package or multiple spills from many small packages. The list is further subdivided into daytime and nighttime situations because the atmospheric conditions are often different depending on the time of day. Atmospheric conditions can significantly affect the size of a chemical hazard area. The warmer, more active atmosphere common during the day disperses chemical contaminants more readily than the cooler, calmer conditions common at night. Therefore, during the day, the lower toxic concentrations may be spread over a larger area than at night, when higher concentrations may exist in a smaller area. The quantity of material spilled or released and the area affected are both important, but the single most critical factor is the concentration of the contaminant in the air. As with the isolation distances provided in orange bordered pages, the initial isolation distance provided in the green bordered pages are the distances within which all persons should be considered for evacuation in all directions from an actual hazardous material spill or leak source. This distance will always be at least 100 feet. Protective action distances are steps taken to preserve the health and safety of emergency responders and the public. People in the area could be evacuated or sheltered in place. Just remember, if hazardous materials are on fire or have been leaking for longer than 30 minutes, this ERG table does not apply. You will need to seek more detailed information on the involved materials on the appropriate orange bordered pages in the ERG. Remember that the orange bordered pages provides recommended isolation and evacuation distances for non-highlighted chemicals with poisonous vapors in situations where the containers are exposed to fire. Materials with text when spilled in water following their names in Table 1 are considered water reactive and are covered in more detail in Table 2. Table 2 will list the chemical produced when the material is spilled in water at the bottom of the page. Some water reactive materials are also TIH materials themselves, such as bromine trifluoride. In this instance, entries are provided in Table 1 to differentiate water-based spills from land-based spills, stating when spilled in water. Table 2 lists water-reactive materials which produce large amounts of TIH gases when the materials are spilled in water. Table 2 also identifies the TIH gases produced as a result of the spill. The materials are listed in ID number order. If the water-reactive material is not a TIH and this material is not spilled in water, Table 1 and Table 2 do not apply and safety distances will be found within the appropriate orange guide. Table 3 lists toxic inhalation hazard materials that may be commonly encountered. The selected materials are ammonia, chlorine, ethylene oxide, hydrogen chloride, along with hydrogen chloride refrigerated liquid, hydrogen fluoride, and sulfur dioxide. The The materials are presented in alphabetical order and provide initial isolation and protective action distances for large spills involving different container types and different volume capacities for daytime situations and nighttime situations and different wind speeds. The review question for this section is, what are the sections of the ERG and what information do the different sections contain?